with regard to infrastructure within Kampala and its metropolitan areas. I do hope that the stakeholders, including KCCA and the National Water and Sewage Corporation, can effectively come and be able to restore some of these pathways within the city. It's embarrassing, no doubt, that within the city, in the middle of it, a capital of a country, the road network continues to be so bad. I do not know whether the conversations about attracting investment do not corner into aspects like the aesthetics of a capital. But that's a conversation that we shall continue to amplify, and hopefully the stakeholders will pay attention as soon as possible. Allow me to bring you back to the studio, and we take note of the conversation on 90 days of oil and gas, human capital development in the oil and gas sector. It is something that is very important. As I had alluded to earlier at the beginning of the show, that this conversation comes at a timely moment. I'll be introducing my guest very shortly, who will be offering us that perspective, but let me just go through a preamble. Today, as part of the 90 days of oil and gas, we aim to explore the critical issue of human capital development within Uganda's burgeoning oil and gas industry. With the sector poised for significant growth, the need for skilled professionals is paramount, and we would like to delve into the challenges and opportunities in this particular extensive field. We are joined by a board member at the Chamber of Mines and Petroleum, who's also the Executive Director at True North, Mr. Abdul Kibuuka. Many thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I know there's a lot to talk about in the oil and gas sector, and as the show was beginning earlier, I had specifically spoken to my audience and told them that we must pay attention. Now, paying attention doesn't mean positioning yourself to do anything that comes up, but to be strategic in the way you do it, because the oil and gas industry is not your average sector. It is not
That's
one
correct.
that you will carry your possibilities as a very cunning business person, as somebody who is aggressive, and then you tell yourself, here I am, I want to do business. They have specific mechanisms, measures that must be put in place, and aspects that you must consider, so much so that if you don't cut it, you don't cut it. There is no question about
correct.
it. First, take us through what the 90 days of oil and gas are before we can delve into the human capital aspects within the industry.
Thanks, Chris, and good morning, viewers. So the 90 days of oil and gas is an initiative of the Uganda Chamber of Mines and Petroleum, which I'm here to represent this morning as one of the council members. It is a campaign we do every year for 3 months, just to create awareness to the public about the activities in the oil and gas sector in Uganda. Because it goes without saying, this is a key strategic sector which provides opportunities to people in different realms of life, from business to employment and other aspects, including obviously as part of the national development. So it's very important that the Uganda public gets to know what the industry is doing and how this is going to affect them. Someone was actually asking some time back how our revenue is going to be used for the oil and gas sector. How many people is the sector employing? How can I get business in oil and gas? We hear there's all sorts of misinformation about the pipeline that's being constructed to evacuate the oil from Uganda to Tanga. People need to know these issues from an informed perspective. So the Chamber initiated this to bring industry experts that can talk about the sector so that people get to understand it and people get to use the opportunities that the sector can present. That's what 90 days of oil and gas is.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I think that's a good initiative and commendation to the Chamber of Mines and Petroleum for that particular endeavor. But I would love you to elaborate on how far the knowledge disbursement has gone. For example, with regard to the institutions and training centers that are supposed to avail the qualified, and I insist, qualified professionals. We have so many professionals, but qualified professionals in this particular industry. There is a tendency, or there's a gray area, I must be very specific, even to the media, on the institutions that are enabling the professionals get the certification needed in order for them to be ready for the work that is supposed to be done.
Okay, Chris, maybe before we go into the institutions, let me just give a quick highlight of the different types of work that could be available.
Perfect.
Because I don't want the public to think that every single job that you do in the oil and gas industry requires a specific oil and gas certification. So there are jobs that require specific oil and gas certification, and I'll come to that.
That's right.
And then there are jobs that don't require specific oil and gas certification, in which case, you, Chris, you can be a media personality, a media focal point for Total Energies or for CNOOC or for any company that plays in the oil and gas sector. You require certification from a journalism institute or your degree from Makerere or anywhere in journalism, not specifically oil and gas. Yeah. So I don't want the public to think that, oh, every job requires oil and gas specific certification. So the sector is big. It's a very, very, very big sector. It does employ people that require specific oil and gas skills, which we call the core or direct oil and gas employment. But also indirect employment in the sector, professionals who work in the sector that may not require specific industry training. But then it's also inducing a lot of employment across the value chain. And before we finish this show, I'll give highlights of how that is going to play out. But going back now to training, there are core professions that are required for the oil and gas sector. And in this particular conversation, we're talking about upstream oil and gas, which has to do with the mining and evacuation of the oil from the ground to the surface and evacuating it to the point where you're going to sell it, including obviously refining it.
That's right.
That's what we call downstream and midstream. Now, to work in the core professions within what we call upstream or the mining of the oil and gas, you need certain professions like petroleum engineers, you need geologists, and you need geologists, you need petroleum engineers, you need project managers, and several other core professions that are required in there. But then there are facilities that are used to operate or to extract the oil and gas. Those facilities would include, for example, things like terminals where you store. Now, to operate in a terminal, you can be a technician trained from any other institute, but with certification in what? In oil and gas. There are also going to be projects that are constructing the facilities, which are going to require a lot of welding, a lot of fabrication of material, and a lot of construction skills. Now, those ones require specific certification. And those were the institutions you are asking about. Now, we have one major institution in Uganda that has been set up to do certification of oil and gas professions. That's the Uganda Paramount Institute in Kigumba. It's a government institute. It is first class. If you travel from here to Kigumba, you will not believe you're in Uganda. It's a first class institute. It's been set up to train people, and I think you should invite them here one day to showcase what they're doing. I have an opportunity. My company, True North, is managing on behalf of Total, is involved in the management of 200 trainees that have been hired by Total, have been recruited by Total, and they're training them into mechanical, electrical, and instrumentation engineering skills. Those will be certified to work now on the facility that is going to do the lifting of oil out of the ground to the surface. Now, there are other private institutions in Uganda, individual training institutions like, I know, for example, Q-Sourcing, one of the companies that is involved in manpower services. They have an institute where they do training and they certify people who are ready to work in oil and gas. But the major one is the Uganda Petroleum Institute in Kigumba. And it has been around since that initiative was started, I think, in 2010. But obviously, it came to life around 2015 when they started graduating many students. So that's where people can go if they want very specific industry skills. But let me make this point. It does not mean that you have to have qualified from Kigumba for you to be trained. Kigumba will do the certification for specific oil and gas requirements.
That's right.
But the oil and gas industry is also employing people from other sectors. I'll give you an example. We are involved in hiring people for the oil and gas sector. There are many companies like mine, what we call manpower services companies. Yeah. We've hired people who have worked for Nile breweries, Uganda breweries, Coca-Cola, all the manufacturing entities. Technicians on the line, they just require further training for 6 months to 1 year. And then they get certified to work in the oil and gas sector. So what people need to do is ask themselves, if I'm a technician in a different sector, what extra training or certification do I require? If I'm a degree holder, for example, if you're a petroleum engineer from Makerere University, are you ready now to work in the sector? It may not be necessarily the case. Yeah. It means that you now need to look for an internship in an oil and gas company for 2 to 3 years for you to be field ready before they can say now you can go.
3 years.
Yes. Oh, wow. So you said it at the beginning of the show that this is not a sector where you just walk in and go to work. Having said that, because it's a very broad value chain, it requires economists, it requires journalists, it requires logistics people, it requires people who understand environmental issues, health and safety, human resource managers, all walks of life. Yeah. So it employs many people like us. I've had it. My entire employment life has been in the oil and gas sector before I left to run my own company. My profession is in human resources. Now, not to say that someone cannot leave Stanbic Bank and come and work in the oil and gas sector as a natural professional. All they need is a proper induction in the company. So I don't want people to close out their minds and say, oh, I don't have certification in oil, in oil and gas, so I can't touch that industry. It depends on your profession.
That's right.
Yes.
All right, now closely related to that is the strategic aspect of local content consideration.
Yes.
What are the percentages, for example, for support services in the oil sector and then to the core qualified professionals? Well, of course, local content being the ability to onboard Ugandans and most especially engineers, so to speak, who have been trained here. What is it like and what is the modus operandi? How is it being rolled out? Okay,
so first of all, local content, which I think the terminology has been changed to national content.
National content.
So when we say local content, we now kind of mean people in the locality. In the locality. In Hoima, in Bulisa, within the mid.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, when we say national content, we're talking about Ugandan nationals that are employed in the sector.
Thank you.
Now, national content is a matter of legislation. All the oil and gas players, licensees and their major subcontractors, you cannot come and set up in Uganda and operate and just bring foreigners and employ them.
That's right.
The first requirement is that you must employ Ugandan nationals in all the jobs until you can prove to the regulator, the petroleum authority, that you cannot get a qualified Ugandan. That's, yes. Okay. So what has happened then is that many of the foreign companies, major licenses and subcontractors, are employing between 80 to 90%, they're employing Ugandan nationals, except the cases where they cannot prove that they have been able to find a suitable Ugandan to do the job. Now, one of the things I've told people, and we keep telling this to people in the industry, is that employing Ugandans is a primary objective of the legislation and the sector. It is a good thing, but also bringing in a few foreigners is also a good thing. Because this is an industry that is new in the country, it means that we have to get people who have experience to train the Ugandans. So if you now look at the people that are currently employed in the industry, if you get the specific statistics, we have about 13,000 people employed already on the industry, on the ground in the valley. You will find that close to 90% of those are Ugandan nationals. But they are not the ones in the core engineering roles that I told you about. Yeah. There are many Ugandans that are being trained. So each of these companies have engineering graduate training programs. Total has many. I've told you about the 200 technicians they have just hired to train. They're going to train them over 3 years. Training, 3 years before they say, you're now ready to go to the to the field. So what is happening, there are industry experts that are coming in. And the Ugandans are being attached to industry experts for training. What you will anticipate is that over time, the expatriates will be phased out and all these jobs will be done by Ugandan nationals. Now, not to say that there are no Ugandans who are senior in technical roles, because the industry has been here since, roughly speaking, 2006. So there are many Ugandans. There are Ugandans in some senior roles, in engineering roles, but not very many, not the number that we want.
That's right.
What we anticipate is that through the life of the industry, which is anticipated about 30 years, when that closes, you'll find so many Ugandans going to other countries to export their skills, doing the work. Yes.
So when it comes to particular skill set, I know the certification modalities will always thresh out this one, but for example, are the various curricula across these institutions that are churning out these experts and graduates aligned to international standards, or there is a case of requiring some of the institutions to also quickly remodel their curriculum to be able to fit international standards? For example, do the people who man the oil industry for the Dutch, is it what we are studying, or do we shall we have to wait?
No, okay. So the oil industry is an international industry. So there's nothing like you're studying a Dutch curriculum or an English curriculum, an American one. There are international certification bodies that are known, or associations or institutions. So for example, you'll find that those international bodies have actually define the curriculum and the requirements, both in terms of knowledge and in terms of practical skills. Now, the biggest challenge that the training institutions are facing, especially at what we call core technician level training, is that many of them do not have the equipment to do the practical training. Because the nature of work in the industry requires a level of experience, which means you have to be able to do, not simply to know. So
if you're going to work on a rig, you must be able to.
You are not coming because you know the theory of drilling.
That's right.
You need to know the practice of drilling. So institutions so the training institutions have to do, the first thing to do is, first of all, understand the standard. For example, standards like OPITO, or the ones for the American Petroleum Institute. Those are international institutes. They do certification. You've got to know, and then you've got to know what equipment do I need to use to train these people on. The equipment has to replicate the live environment in the field. And that is where we feel very proud of UPIC, because UPIC has bought that set of equipment.
UPIC being the Uganda Petroleum,
the Uganda Petroleum Institute in Chugumba. So they are training people on the theory, but also on the practice. They are helping them simulate the environment. If you go to look at the trainees at Uganda Petroleum Institute, they are not any different from how the people are in the field doing the work. They wake up in the morning, they wear hard boots, they wear hard hats, they wear coveralls, the way you would be in the work setting. And then they take them through the theory, and after the theory, they take them through to the labs to do the actual simulation of the work. They also take them through drills that are analogous to what they are likely to find on the ground when they go to work. So by the time of the end of the certification, someone is what we call field ready. They're ready to go and execute the work because they've gone through both the theory and the training. Having said that, there are institutions like Makerere, institutions like Chambogo that teach engineering students. You can leave Makerere with a degree in civil engineering or mechanical engineering or electrical engineering, and it gives you the foundation to start to become an engineer in oil and gas. It may not necessarily be petroleum engineering now. The institutions that are teaching core subjects like petroleum geology or petroleum engineering they have done a lot of benchmarking over the years. Some of them have been helped by the oil and gas sector players, like the Totals, formerly the Tullow Oils, like the Schlumberger, to go into collaboration with foreign universities that have helped them on the curriculum development. So the curriculum is good enough. The real challenge that we are going to face in the country will just be around absorption. How many do you train every year in the core petroleum skills? How many can the industry absorb? I think that's a challenge that needs to be absorbed, because the oil and gas sector is not a mass employer. It does not take so many, because the technology is so advanced, they require less people to do a lot of work. So we just need to manage that over the years so that we don't get a big influx of people trained in core petroleum engineering skills that may not find the work in the industry because the numbers are not terribly many that are required. All
right. That is quite exhaustive, and the perspective, of course, gives us an understanding of what's happening. Now, on the regulatory front, I'm sure as sector players and people who are working in support of the industry, there are aspects that need to be worked on as fast as possible. Legislation is something that the government has given its all, especially to ensure that the management of oil revenues is good enough. Also the workings, including recruitment and how everything goes on in there. But there are existing gaps. As an insider or an observer for that matter, what needs to be expedited on the part of legislation or on the regulatory front to allow for a smooth onboarding of all the workforce that the oil and gas sector expects to take on?
Interesting question. Yes, first of all, I have to commend government. The oil and gas legislation in Uganda is very, very, very good. It's very, very good. I have had an opportunity to work in the oil and gas sector, as I told you, almost my entire career, my entire employment career. I worked earlier on for Shell before joining Tullow Oil, and I had an opportunity to join in the early years of the industry. I joined upstream petroleum in 2008.
You were an early adopter.
Yes. So at the time when so many people were doubting whether there was even enough commercial oil in Uganda. Yes, I do remember when I was leaving Shell, I was told that Shell had done a study and had dismissed the oil find in Uganda as inconsequential, as commercially unviable. And that's the time when I joined. So I've been very close to the industry. I've also had an opportunity to travel to countries like Ghana, who have discovered oil, and countries like Nigeria. They were very, very slow in legislating how the industry would be run. And Uganda, that's one of the things Uganda did early. We also have an advantage that because of the nature of logistics for our oil find, it has not been so easy to extract it quickly. So it's been very slow and frustrating for some people, but in a way it's been a blessing because it has allowed the country to legislate and put in place frameworks to promote these things. Now, coming back to the human capital issue, now it's legislated. Yes, so national content is a requirement. All the players are required. First priority, Ugandans, before you can bring in a foreign national. So that is good. The problem is, and where the gap is in the legislation or what can be improved, is that, and by there are also clear penalties for not actually meeting the legislated requirements. The challenge though is that the legislation did not provide for sufficient incentives to make that happen. Yes. So and the way the nature of work happens, the way work happens in oil and gas, you give a license to Total or CNOOC or UNOC. None of those three licenses is going to execute all the work across the value chain. They are going to subcontract work to another contractor. That person also is going to subcontract a level of work to a third party. All of these are supposed to work to certain international standard of work in terms of health and safety, in terms of work methods.
That's right.
And then you say they must employ Ugandan nationals, but the Ugandan nationals haven't been trained or qualified to execute work to the standard. So it means that the players have to find a way to train the Ugandan nationals on fast track to get them ready to execute the work. The question is...
On own resources.
On resources, that's where the challenge is. So the national content legislation, in my personal view, should have provided for a space for incentives. If you train 10 Ugandans and get them qualified to international standard, and the standards are known by the legislators, maybe you get a rebate in terms of tax, or you get that money refunded, because again, we're also under what is called a cost recovery regime. Now, for the licensees, they can cost recover that money. When I come to tender to do work for a licensee, I don't have access to cost recovery, but I have a requirement to train my people to international standard. Now, when I'm participating in the tender, it is difficult for me to put in a budget for this capacity development. So what is happening in turn is that people are doing the minimum they can do, to train people. So my view is that the missing gap, especially for local entities, because there are many companies that have won major contracts to execute works for oil and gas, which is a good thing, especially in spaces like logistics, lifting equipment, environmental services, and so on. Local companies, good players, good initiative. How do you get them to train people to an international standard when they are not sure that if they train so many people, it is a requirement for them winning the tender next time? They're not sure. So the incentive may not be there full time to say, okay, I'm going to invest all my time and resources to grow capacity of Ugandans to participate in the industry. So they'll do the minimum. How are they sure that, of course, the national laws in Uganda don't provide any incentives for capacity development. So even if you train so many people here, NTV has trained so many journalists here, I don't think you get any tax rebate at the end of the year or even 5 years that you can account to the costs of training or growing capacity. I think that's a missing thing in our national legislation across the board, in terms of growing capacity and training professionals.
They're simply hanging on to the fact that their skills and abilities enhance the image and broaden its ability to be able to reach bottom line results.
Yes, and here's the thing, is that you can train the people, and then your competitor that you are bidding with for the next tender will just come and take them. So therefore, you begin to worry about, should I invest, how much should I invest? And I think many people are being minimalist in their investment in time. The licensees, in my view, are doing a fairly good job of training people, but the subcontractors at the next level and the third level, what we call tier 1 contractors and tier 2 and tier 3, I don't think they're doing enough. And it's very difficult to blame them because the incentives for them to do so are not very clear. Two, in their commercials, when they were bidding for the work, I don't think there was a specific requirement to say how much of this budget in your tender will be allocated to what? To training and national capacity development.
All right. I think you've been very exhaustive in helping us understand the dynamics. And of course, we do hope that the 90 days of oil and gas initiative is one that will score highly in terms of what you guys want to achieve at the Chamber of Mines and Petroleum. Many thanks, Mr. Abdul M. Kibuuka, for the perspective. That has been Abdul M. Kibuuka. He is a board member of the Council of Mines and, of course, Executive Director at True North, service provider, and has an understanding of the dynamics within the oil and gas sector. Do stay with us. Kickstarter will be coming up next, and the discussion will be on analyzing the National Identification Security System and also examining citizens' registration and data consolidation.